Now, let's talk about how the inflation is measured. To measure inflation rate, we need to calculate the overall price level. Here are the three steps to calculate price levels. First, we need to define a basket of goods and services. This is a hypothetical group of items with specific quantities that represent what a typical consumer buys. Second, we need to find the prices for those exact items across different time periods. Third, we multiply the quantities by the prices to find the total cost of the basket. Let's look at a simple example. Our basket has one popcorn, two Cokes, and two movie tickets. By multiplying the quantities by prices, we can calculate total values of each item and then sum all the total values for each year. In 2015, the total basket price is $40, and in 2016, the price of popcorn and tickets went up, so the total basket price roses to $44. To make these numbers easier to compare, economists use index numbers. An index number is a uniform value that usually centers around 100. We don't use dollar signs here. We pick a base year and set its value to 100. The formula is to divide the basket price by the base basket price in the base year and then multiply by 100. Using our previous example, let's see 2015 as our base year. For 2015, the index is naturally 100. For 2016, we take the new basket price of $44 and divide by the base price of $40 and then multiply by 100 to get an index of 110. Now we can clearly see a 10-point jump in the index. Now we can find the inflation rate, which is the percentage change in the price levels over time. The formula is to divide the difference between the current and previous price levels by the prior price levels and then multiply by 100. This can be calculated monthly, quarterly, or annually, depending on what data you need. Let's finish our math. Our 2015 index was 100 and our 2016 index was 110. Plug those into the formula. 110 minus 100 over 100 and times 100. So the inflation rate between 2015 and 2016 was 10%. Now that we've walked through a simplified basket, let's look at the actual tools used by the United States government, the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. This isn't just a handful of items. US government statisticians at the Bureau of Labor Statistics track a fixed basket of goods and services to represent the spending of the average urban consumer. To keep this organized, the BLS breaks everything down into 8 major categories: food and beverages, housing, apparel, transportation, medical care, recreation, education and communication, other goods and services. When you hear the media talk about the inflation rate, this is almost always CPI. It's important to understand that not every price change is treated equally in the CPI. We use weight to reflect the importance of different goods and services in the average consumer's budget. Essentially, the weight of an item is determined by its share of total spending. If households spend a large portion of their income on specific categories like rent, that category receives a higher weight. In contrast, if you spend very little on something like t-shirt, it receives a lower weight. This ensures that the 10% increase in the price of something vital like rent has a much bigger impact on the inflation index than a 10% increase in the price of something minor like t-shirts. Let's look at the pie chart. You can notice that housing is the most significant component, making up the 42% of the average consumer's basket. This is why fluctuations in the housing market and rental prices are so critical to our national inflation data. Following housing, we see food and beverages and transportations tied at 15% each. On the smaller end of the scale, apparel and other goods each only account for 3% of the total. This graph shows the historical trajectories of US inflation from the late 1940s to the early 2020s. The blue line represents the annual inflation rate. The shaded vertical bars represent the periods where the United States was in a recession. You will notice several distinct historical periods here. The great inflation of the 1970s shows massive spikes where inflation climbed toward 15%. The great moderation is a long period of relative stability. Then we see the sharp dip below the 0% line during the Great Recession in 2009. It indicates deflation. Finally, you can see the dramatic spikes during the post-pandemic era. Economists actually track two different versions of the inflation rates to get a clear picture of the economy. The first is the inflation rate, often called headline inflation. This uses the full CPI basket, including everything, even food and energy. While this shows the actual change in your cost of living, it can be very volatile because the food and energy prices often swing widely due to the weather and geopolitical events. To filter out that wild movement, we use the core inflation rate, which excludes food and energy. By removing those two volatile categories, the core rate helps us see the underlying trend in how prices are changing. Let's look at the graph comparing headline inflation rate and core inflation rate. You can notice how the headline inflation lines tends to have much sharper peaks and deeper valleys. The core inflation line is usually smoother. When the Federal Reserve is deciding whether to change interest rates, they often pay closer attention to the core rate because it tells them that if rising prices are happening everywhere, not just from temporary increases like gas or groceries. While the CPI is the most popular measure, it is not the only one we use. We also look at the Producer Price Index, or PPI. Unlike the CPI, which looks at what consumers pay, the PPI measures the price paid for supplies and inputs by the producers themselves. It tracks different industries and stages of processing. Finally, there is the GDP deflator. As you know, this is the broadest measure of all because it is not limited to a consumer basket. It tracks the prices of all components of GDP, including consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. Thank you for watching.